I shouldn't have shown up to that meeting. I knew it the second I walked into the boardroom and saw my nameplate, Jessica Wren, co-founder, sitting at the far end of the glass table like a decoration no one bothered to dust. The others were already there. My father, white-haired and always over-prepared, my brother Dean, fidgeting in his chair with a Rolex that cost more than my car, and my mother, perfectly silent, like she always was when they were about to do something unforgivable. They didn't even look up when I sat down, not even a nod. 15 years ago, this company was scribbles in my journal, late-night coding sessions, ramen-stained napkins with product sketches, and caffeine that kept me alive more than food did. Now it was a $180 million empire, and somehow I had become a ghost inside its walls. "Before we begin," Dean said, tapping the table with a silver pen, "let's address some restructuring ideas." That's when my heart knew what my mind had suspected for weeks. They were going to cut me out, strip my role, minimize my voice, make me a figurehead, a footnote in the company I had helped build from a blank Google Doc. I glanced at the agenda. There it was. Item 2, redistribution of strategic decision-making rights among core executives. That was corporate for, "You're not wanted anymore." I smiled, not because it didn't hurt, but because I was done being surprised by them. Most people assume betrayal feels like a stab in the back. Quick, sharp, bloody. But when your family betrays you, it's slower, like a needle. Over time, they just drain you. When I brought in our first investor, Dad called it a lucky accident. When I landed the licensing deal with a national retailer, Dean said I must have slept with someone. And when I requested to lead the expansion into Asia, the board mysteriously voted no, with 3 abstentions from my own blood. I kept thinking it would change, that if I just worked harder, stayed longer, proved myself again and again, they'd see me, hear me, acknowledge that I was more than just the creative brain they tolerated. Instead, they took my silence as weakness, my loyalty as obedience, and my ownership as leverage they could outvote. Dean looked over at me that day finally and said, "Jess, it's not personal, it's just better this way. You've always been more of a vision type. You'll be happier not worrying about the details." I almost laughed. Happier? I had bled for this company. I had cried in server rooms, fixed bugs at 3 a.m., pulled all-nighters while they vacationed in Aspen. But they saw me as a liability now. No, worse, a placeholder, and placeholders are easy to erase. That meeting only lasted 46 minutes. I didn't fight them, not yet. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't tell them what I had already done, because I had signed an NDA 2 days earlier with a buyer who didn't care about my last name or my family drama. All they cared about was this: "Do you really own 51%? Yes, I did. Quietly, legally, fully. That's what no one in that room knew, because I never needed them to. As I walked out of the boardroom that day, Dean called after me, "Jess, you're not going to make this difficult, are you?" I paused, looked at the hallway, then at him, and I said, "No, Dean, I'm going to make it memorable." If you've ever been made invisible in a room you helped build, you know this feeling. If you've ever had to watch people take credit for your sweat, your pain, your nights of self-doubt, you know this burn. Let me know if that's ever happened to you. Drop your story in the comments. I'll read every single one, and stay with me, because what happened next, even I wasn't ready for. Subscribe if you've ever been underestimated. This story, it's just getting started. There was a time when none of them believed in me. Not even a little. I remember sitting on the cold tile floor of my apartment, bare walls, 2 cracked mugs, and a thrifted desk too wobbly to lean on, building the wireframe for our first app. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't even good code. But it was mine. And when it finally worked, when I hit run and saw the mock-up come to life, I called my dad first. He said, "That's nice, Jess. But maybe don't quit your day job yet." I had already quit my day job. My family always thought of me as the creative one, the dreamer, the girl who doodled logos on napkins and wore the same black jeans for weeks because I couldn't afford laundry and rent. But they didn't see the back-end code, the cold emails I sent at 2 a.m., the 3 rejections for every 1 reply, the nights I fell asleep sitting upright, fingers still on the keyboard. They didn't see the fire in me, only the smoke. When I finally brought in a small investment, a tech incubator grant of $20,000, I thought they'd be proud. Dean joked, "That's like Lunch money for a real company. Dad chuckled. Just don't let it distract you from finding a husband. I remember smiling, biting the inside of my cheek so I wouldn't scream. I had spent 6 months preparing that pitch deck. I had flown coach and slept in airport chairs just to meet people who could help us scale. And when the checks cleared, you know what I did? I put every dollar back into the company. No shopping spree, no designer shoes, just better servers, a real designer to polish the UI, and a part-time assistant so I could stop handling every support ticket at 3 a.m. It was around that time that they suddenly started taking me seriously. Or pretending to. Dad offered guidance. Dean said he could help structure the C-suite. Mom said, "Why don't we turn it into a family brand?" And like a fool, I let them in. I thought maybe it would bring us closer, that maybe success would heal old wounds. Instead, it made them hungrier. They added their names to things I built. Their titles grew. Their control grew. And mine, it shrank. Until I was Chief Vision Officer, a title that sounds important until you realize it means nothing. It means, put her somewhere she won't bother anyone. But what they never took from me was the cap table. From the beginning I held 51%. No matter how many roles they maneuvered, no matter how many times they diluted their own shares in exchange for bonuses, I held my piece tight. Quietly, legally, ironclad. Because somewhere deep down, I knew this day would come. The day they'd forget who really built the bones of this company. The day they'd mistake silence for surrender. One night, maybe a year before that board meeting, I sat on the rooftop of our office building. It was late, everyone had gone home, and I was staring down at the city lights like they were stars someone dropped. I opened my notebook and wrote, "They'll remember me when the walls shake." It wasn't anger, it was a promise. I wasn't trying to destroy them, I just wanted to be seen. But when someone tries to erase you, your story, your work, your name, there's only one thing left to do. Make yourself unignorable. If you've ever had your worth questioned by people who couldn't build what you've built, you're not alone. You're not crazy, you're not dramatic, you're just surrounded by people too small to see your scale. Leave it in the comments if you've ever felt like the forgotten architect. Because I promise you, foundations remember. If you've ever sat in a room full of people who owe you everything but treat you like a ghost, you'll understand what I'm about to say. Silence is the most underrated weapon in a war they never see coming. At first, I tried to speak up. I sat through meetings where I offered ideas, real, tested, market-ready strategies, and was met with, "That's interesting, Jess, but let's circle back to that later." We never circled back. I watched Dean pitch my exact roadmap 2 weeks later and get applause. Dad would nod like Dean was Moses with stone tablets. Mom? She just smiled, her soft, distant smile. She never defended me. But she never stopped me either. I suppose that was her idea of balance. Let the men talk, Jess. Don't make a scene. Eventually, I stopped offering ideas. I stopped raising my hand. I became the silent one, the harmless one. They thought I was checked out. What they didn't realize was that I was checking everything, every file, every transaction, every loophole in our bylaws, every time someone signed something without reading the fine print. I studied the share agreements, I spoke with lawyers they didn't know I had. I ran scenarios, modeled outcomes, because they'd taken everything else, but they'd forgotten one thing. I was still the architect, and if you build the house, you know exactly where to pull when it's time to make it collapse. Then came lunch with Mara Voss. She was sharp, maybe mid-50s, with a voice like glass, and a portfolio that could freeze a boardroom. We met at a hotel bar in Chicago, neutral territory. "I hear you're sitting on 51%, she said without preamble, sipping something dark and serious. "And I hear your family thinks you won't do a damn thing with it." I didn't flinch. "And if I am?" I said. Mara smirked. "Then I'd like to offer you a number big enough to make them choke on their next quarterly report." I didn't say yes that day, but I didn't say no. I asked questions, listened, checked her reputation, called former partners. She was the real deal. No emotional strings, just clean execution. "You sell to me," she said a week later over a secure call, "and they'll wake up one morning realizing the company they thought they owned no longer belongs to them." Back at headquarters, the boardroom felt colder. I kept attending, quiet, nodding, smiling when needed, taking notes I didn't need. They barely noticed me anymore. Dean was busy preparing a pitch deck for Series D expansion. He dropped lines like, "As acting CEO, I think it's time we make aggressive moves," as if he'd founded the place on his own. They were too busy running victory laps to see the cliff ahead. One Friday, I caught him laughing with our lead engineer. "Jess is harmless," he said, thinking I'd left the floor. "She just wants to make logos and inspirational speeches." I should have been mad, but all I felt was peace. They weren't scared of me, which meant they wouldn't see it coming. The contract was signed 3 days later. I sold 51% to Mara's holding group under a confidentiality clause. I kept one copy in a fireproof folder under my bed. I kept another locked in a drive no one could access without biometric ID. The final copy? That one was being processed by lawyers who specialized in hostile reorgs. It was done. Now all I had to do was wait. Wait for the day they'd realize that the woman they tried to erase had quietly rewritten the script. And oh, how quickly the lights would flicker when the curtain fell. Ever had to watch people clap for someone who stole your work? Ever had to make yourself invisible just long enough to get your power back? Then you know. Leave it in the comments if you've ever been underestimated on purpose, and stay close. Because, in the next 48 hours, 69 calls would light up my screen. It happened on a Tuesday. The air was hot, sticky, the kind of humidity that makes your skin feel like it's wearing someone else's breath. I was in a corner office of a law firm on the 42nd floor, staring at a contract thicker than any of the business books Dean pretended to read. The kind of contract that could detonate an empire, quietly, efficiently, legally. My pen hovered for just a second. Then I signed. Initials, full name, date. Each stroke felt like a liberation. Across the table, Mara didn't smile. She didn't need to. The handshake we shared afterward wasn't warm, it was surgical. "You understand," she said, "this isn't about revenge, it's about correction." I nodded. "Trust me, I'm not angry anymore. I'm ready." That night my family threw a party. 15 years of Rentec on the market. 15 years since I gave up weekends, relationships, sleep. 15 years since I bet everything on a dream I had in the back of a diner. They hosted it at our original office space, now converted into a sleek showroom with LED lights and gold-plated plaques on the wall. I wasn't invited, at least not formally. But I showed up anyway. Not to crash it, not even to watch, just to be there. I stood in the back near the catering tables, sipping flat champagne while Dean toasted to family legacy and Dad winked at investors. Mom posed for photos with the intern she didn't remember hiring, and no one noticed me, not until my phone buzzed, softly, once, then again, and again. Within 10 minutes, it was vibrating non-stop in my pocket. I stepped outside, unlocked the screen, 69 missed calls, first from Dean, then Dad, then the CFO, then legal, then Mom, twice, which surprised me most. I had timed it precisely. At 7:45 p.m., Mara's firm executed the notification protocol. A legal team sent out the ownership transfer letters to every board member. The stock registrar updated the majority shareholder on public record. Within minutes, Rentec, at its most public, celebratory moment, was no longer a Ren-owned company. Not really. Not legally. I walked back in, calm, still unnoticed. Dean was laughing at some joke about AI replacing assistants. He hadn't checked his phone yet. I walked past him, close enough to hear him say, "Jessica? She probably thinks she deserves a thank you speech or something." I didn't stop, I didn't flinch, I just smiled and whispered to myself, "No. I want silence. That's louder." At 8:02 p.m. the music cut mid-song. The event manager's headset lit up. The AV screen flickered. A single slide appeared, white background, black text, "To all staff and partners, a formal statement from the new controlling party will be issued tomorrow at 9 a.m. Dean's face turned the color of chalk. Dad clutched his phone, turning slowly toward Mom, like a man realizing the car had already gone off the cliff. I left without saying a word. No confrontation, no victory lap, just clean air and the sound of my heels echoing down the parking lot as their phones lit up like 1,000 fireflies of panic. The only thing I did just before driving off was text Dean. 3 words, "Check the ledger." They thought I'd make noise, that I'd demand meetings, argue, scream, threaten, but noise is predictable. Silence? That's war dressed in grace. I woke up the next morning to a chorus of chaos. 16 voicemails, 32 unread messages, and my inbox, a war zone of flagged emails from PR, legal, and board observers trying to understand the situation. Understand it? It was simple. I sold 51%, legally, strategically, without permission, because I didn't need any. The first call I took was from our attorney, Jackson. Jessica, he said, voice tight. They're losing their minds. Define losing, I asked, stirring my coffee. He sighed. Your brother is threatening litigation he can't even file. Your father is trying to freeze the announcement, and your mother left a voicemail that sounded like a church eulogy. I let that sit for a second. Then I said, let them scream. By 10 a.m., Rentec's internal Slack thread had over 200 unread messages. Some employees were confused. Others were cheering. Wait, Jess had controlling interest this whole time? No way she pulled that off. That's baller. CEO just stormed out of the exec floor. I'm not even mad, I'm impressed. Dean of course tried to spin it. He issued a company-wide memo. This change does not affect daily operations. We are still committed to our values and team spirit. I almost choked on my toast. At 10:32 a.m. my phone rang again. This time I picked up. Dean, his voice was tight, controlled, fake calm. Jess, he said, we need to talk. We are talking, I said, putting him on speaker while I typed an email to HR. He hesitated. You blindsided us. No, I replied, you ignored me. There's a difference. A long silence. Then, you've always had a chip on your shoulder. You couldn't just be part of something bigger. You had to control it. I paused my typing. Dean, I built it, from scratch, while you were still updating your LinkedIn bio to say visionary. He swore under his breath. You're going to ruin this family, he snapped. I smiled. No, Dean, you did that the day you treated me like a branding mascot instead of a partner. Then I hung up. By noon, the board had called an emergency session. Mara joined the video call. She didn't waste time. As of this morning, our entity holds majority control, she said, calm as a glacier. We're reviewing executive performance, restructuring top-level management, and conducting a leadership audit. Dean stuttered. Dad fumed. Mom, quiet, as always, just stared at the floor. I didn't speak until the end, just 5 words. This isn't a coup, it's closure. That night I drove to our childhood home. I didn't go inside. I sat in the car, engine running, looking at the windows glowing gold from the same old chandelier I used to read under. Mom came to the door. She saw me, didn't wave, didn't cry. Just looked at me for a long time, like she was searching for a version of me she hadn't bothered to learn. Then she turned and walked back inside. Funny thing about revenge, it's never as loud as you imagine. Sometimes it's just stillness. A shift in power. A door closing. A phone that rings and no one picks up anymore. If you've ever waited for an apology that never came, if you've ever built something while they laughed, if you've ever stayed quiet until it was your turn, drop it in the comments because you know what it feels like to burn with dignity. The first apology didn't come from Dean. Of course not. It came from Randall, the quietly loyal COO who once told me years ago that my suggestions were ambitious but maybe too emotional. He sent a single-line email. I underestimated you. I won't make that mistake again. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, not because of the words, but because of who didn't send anything. 2 days later, I got a voice message from Mom. I almost deleted it. But curiosity is stubborn. Jessica, honey, listen. I know this probably doesn't mean much right now, but I wish I had stood up for you more. I should have. Your father and brother, they never gave you credit. I let that happen. I'm sorry. The audio was soft, broken in places. She wasn't crying, but she wasn't composed either. And for a second, I felt 8 years old again, standing outside her bedroom door, waiting for her to notice that I'd gotten first place in the science fair. She never opened the door that night, and she wasn't opening it now either. Just sending ghosts through voicemail. Then came Dad. Not an apology, not even close. He emailed me a scanned check for $500. No message, just re-family. I stared at the PDF for a full minute. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or scream. $500. Was it a joke, a bribe, a peace offering, or just habit? This man once said you don't deserve dividends if you can't sit through a full earnings call. And now here he was, sending a symbolic gesture like it could erase years of erasure. I didn't cash it. I forwarded it to our new payroller with a note. Please add this to next quarter's employee relief fund, every cent. And Dean? He didn't call, didn't text, but he did post a vague rant on LinkedIn. Sometimes leadership gets hijacked by people who mistake control for contribution. Real founders know how to share. The post got 3 likes. I screen capped it, saved it in a folder I labeled Delusion, and moved on. Because I'd learned something important that week. Not all apologies are spoken. Some are delivered in silence, in resignation letters, in frozen expressions, when the power balance flips, in eyes that no longer meet yours at the elevator. I walked through the office alone that Friday, same floors, same walls, but everything was different. People looked up when I passed, not with fear, not with fake respect, but with curiosity, recognition, attention. No more placeholder, no more silent founder. They saw me now, all of me. In the conference room where it all began, I stood at the whiteboard and drew a circle. In it I wrote 3 words: vision, value, voice. Then I drew a line through the old mission statement taped to the wall. We weren't just rebuilding a company, we were correcting a story. If you've ever had to make peace with an apology that never came, or one that came too late, know this. Their regret isn't your responsibility. Their guilt isn't your job to fix. Your peace doesn't need their permission. Drop it in the comments if you've ever had to stay cool while your heart was still healing. And stay with me, because this story doesn't end with revenge. It ends with something better. 2 months after the sale, I opened a new office. No press release, no ribbon cutting. Just me, a clean desk, and a single word printed on the glass door. Jess. No surname. No legacy to prove. No family name to carry, just mine. The new company wasn't flashy, it didn't need to be. I built it from the ground up again, but this time with boundaries. With a team that saw me not as potential, but as the standard. We weren't scaling for investors, we were scaling for impact. And every day I walked in, I remembered how it felt to be erased, and how I refused to let that happen to anyone who worked beside me. Dean sent me one last email. Congrats on the rebrand. If you're ever open to talking about a strategic merger. I didn't reply. Not out of spite, but because I no longer needed to prove anything, to him or to myself. My silence wasn't bitterness, it was evolution. Mom dropped off a package one afternoon. No text. Just a brown box left at the front desk with my name scribbled in careful cursive. Inside was my old notebook, the one I used to carry around in college, full of startup sketches, half-finished logos, and late-night dream math. On the last page, in handwriting that wasn't mine, were the words, "They'll never understand what they couldn't build, but I see it now." She had signed it. Love, Mom. I closed the notebook, held it to my chest for a moment, then slid it onto a shelf. Not to forget, but to honor what I had survived. Sometimes I still drive past the old Rentec building. The name's still there, shiny on the glass, but now, when I see it, I don't feel anger, I don't feel loss, I feel release. Because I was never built to beg for a seat at a table I helped carve. I was built to walk away and make a better one. And I did. To anyone who's ever been pushed out of something they helped build, to anyone whose ideas were stolen, whose voice was dimmed, whose fire was treated like a liability, you're not a mistake. You're a blueprint. Drop in the comments if you're building something of your own, especially if it started in silence. And if this story felt like yours, share it. Like it. Let someone else know they're not alone. Because this wasn't about revenge. This was about remembering who I've always been.